So we all know that the X100 series is one of the most popular cameras out there, and obviously for good reason. It is a very small, compact, lightweight, travel, kind of everyday camera. Has a 35mm equivalent lens with a fast f2 aperture. Now I've owned multiple different versions of the X100 camera going back to the original version and have traveled extensively with all of them as well. So I will basically give you my thoughts on what things are maybe worth grabbing and what things may be a little bit overkill. So right off the bat, one of the first things that I always do at least is I change out the included strap for a strap that may be a little bit more suited to my style or my preferences, all that kind of stuff. If you've seen these little things on the side of camera, these are from a company called Peak Design, and they just allow kind of like a quick release setup here. So my friend Todd with Color Supply Co., if you've seen any of my videos, you've probably seen one of these straps being used. You just pop it on, and personally, I actually kind of had been asking Todd for a long time to make a smaller, skinnier version that specifically is going to do well with cameras like the X100 series, like most Fujifilm cameras, and like most small Leica cameras, film cameras, stuff like that. So the nice thing is that you just get a really nice leather strap. It's really small and compact, and you don't need a lot of extra stuff going into that because it's such a lightweight camera. If you want to though, and you own more than one camera, the best thing about this is you can just add these onto every camera that you have. So let's say you do have a camera that is slightly heavier, you know, maybe buying a strap that isn't that lightweight strap, but is one that has a little bit thicker leather and a little bit more padding, stuff like that would work well. It makes traveling and obviously switching cameras much easier and saves you a lot of money without having to buy a ton of different straps. Now, the second thing that I did when I first got one of these cameras was I bought a lens hood for it. So the very first one that I ever bought was just kind of like a mimic of the original Fujifilm one. So this one is from JJC, just a basic lens hood here. And I'll obviously put links in the description for all of these. So it's basically the one that Fujifilm makes themselves. Just like a round hood that has a little bit of vented space here. So if you're looking through the optical viewfinder, you get that. And the nice thing is that there are just so many cool options nowadays. Personally, I think that having a lens hood on here is really, really nice to have. And I just don't use lens caps. I always forget them. And so having a lens hood on here basically is just my version of having something to protect the lens. The only thing is you change your camera from being this small and something you might be able to put in like a back pocket or something into sticking out quite a bit from your body, from your person. And so it obviously helps to have a lens shade on there, a lens hood. Also looks cooler, to be honest, but is a little bit more of an inconvenience in terms of, yeah, it's just size. That being said, I have used these little extension ring things before, and this doesn't necessarily give you a lens hood, but it moves things out just enough that you can either put a filter here or, you know, you just have a little bit more depth there. It's not going to stick out too much, but you're going to get a little bit more protection. Now, there are two main kind of filters, well, three actually, that I would generally recommend. Personally, I really love these Moment Cinebloom filters, specifically the 5%. And I have a video that you can check out up here that goes over the 5%, 10%, and 20%. The 5% for me is a really good version because it's very minimal and it kind of, I think I actually have one on the camera filming me right now. It just kind of like blooms the highlights a little bit, makes a little bit of a diffusion kind of thing here, which gives you a little bit more of a filmic kind of look, I guess. So by adding just a filter adapter, you're able to do that. It keeps the form factor really small and not obtrusive or anything like that. Another thing that I learned, and this is like kind of like more of an advanced thing, but the camera, to get the most dynamic range, you need to shoot at 640 ISO to get like the full dynamic range in the JPEGs. And so what I've used before is a variable ND filter. But the point being is you have to up your ISO a little bit to get more dynamic range in your JPEGs. So these are basically sunglasses for your camera. A lot of filmmakers use this to get their shutter speeds to be where they want them. And speaking of shutter speeds, at those higher shutter speeds like 1/4000th, 1/2000th, and even sometimes 1/1000th, you'll see a little bit of weird blurriness in the out of focus elements. I like to keep my shutter speed on these cameras, if I can, to 1/500th of a second. And in doing that, I also want to have my ISO be at 640, if at all possible. I do use the internal ND filter here as well, but sometimes that's just not enough when you're trying to do 640 and 1/500th. On top of that, if you want to just use a filter adapter and then use a UV filter, just a clear filter just as protection, the X100V here also is weather resistant and stuff if you have a filter like that on here. So especially with the X100V, if you're going to be out in the rain or the elements at all, having something in there to cover up the lens, which I believe is where kind of like the weak point is for that, is obviously going to be really helpful. Now, I have a lot of different lens hoods because I've used these cameras over the years, and Square Hood has been nice enough to send me some over the years as well. So the first one being the original Square Hood look here. For a minimal lens hood kind of setup here, you're not adding a lot more depth or anything. It also covers up the lens quite a bit. So I've been told that it looks like the end of a vacuum cleaner, but personally, I think that these just look really good. And yeah, they're minimal. They fit the camera really well in terms of styling. And I'm just not worried about the lens getting hit with anything because it's such a small front opening there that it'd just be really difficult to get something in there. So this model is from Haug, or however you say that. And then this is the original Square Hood one. The Haug version is a lot bigger. And it's the one that you're going to find on Amazon or whatever. Obviously is a ripoff of the original Square Hood. But yeah, personally, I would rather support someone who's just making the real stuff. But obviously this came with a camera that I purchased, so figured I would just let you know the options that are out there. Now, this model is a vented hood that is kind of the opposite of what, oh, that was pretty cool, the Square Hood is. So the Square Hood is kind of like an inverted version. So this goes out the other way. Looks pretty cool and definitely has more of like kind of a Leica look to it. And as well, you have the vented hood here. So if you're looking through the optical viewfinder, that's kind of what that looks like. Now, this model is their latest. It's similar to the other vented version, but I actually had a 35mm Summicron from Leica, and that lens hood is almost identical to this one in terms of its styling and just general overall look. So another one that just feels very classic, feels very Leica inspired. And the nice thing about this one is that the Moment Cinebloom filters are definitely really popular with the X100 series, but the way that all of the other lens hoods are constructed, it's just a little bit too big to fit into those openings. But the nice part is that these specifically are made a little bit wider so that you can put the filter on like this, and then the hood slips right over. You just tighten the side pieces here to get it on there and stable, and then you're ready to go. So it gives you both protection and the look you're looking to get out of this. So if you are someone that is looking to get a hood that wants to use specifically the Cinebloom filters, I don't think this is an issue with anything else, but it's something that I feel like, yeah, works really well and looks really good. And just because I have it, I've actually never tried this before, so this is a new thing for me as well. If you are someone that would want to try a black lens hood on a silver body, I've actually never owned a black version of the X100V, but they obviously make these hoods in black versions as well. So another fun little tidbit is that although this looks a little bit weird, it actually looks a lot better than I thought it was going to. And the original Leica 35mm Summicron spherical that this lens hood seems like it's kind of based off of, on the silver version of that lens, it actually came with the same black lens hood that the black version came with. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more minimal and you still wanted to be able to use a Cinebloom filter and have a lens hood, this looks a lot better than I thought it was going to. Now, moving beyond just those lens hoods, a couple other things that I've used over the years and want to, I guess, chat about here. So the first of which being these shutter buttons. I know that the buttons on a Fujifilm camera, they're a little bit more loose. And I've heard people say that, you know, if you put a shutter button on here, it'll ruin your camera. I can't imagine that that's really the case. But I will say that there are a few different kind of options. This one is incredibly minimal. It's literally just like a little added button there. For the X100, when it's just a regular kind of setup like this, I really prefer this tiny little lens button. It looks really good, it works really well. But when it's a little bit bigger and you have a little bit larger of a setup, oddly enough, I like the concave versions like this one here. I have been using these on my Leica cameras and on my film cameras and stuff for a long, long time. And I've recently found a good setup from Amazon where you can get a really cheap set. I got a pack that came with red, black, this silver, as well as this brass color. And I do think that the brass looks really, really good. And while this isn't an X100 camera, obviously it kind of just fits in this little world, so I thought I'd toss it out here. We actually have another one of these little square hoods for this, and this little TT Artisan lens is really similar to Fujifilm's 27 2.8, but is actually very different. I did a full review on this thing if you want to check it out. They definitely copied it in terms of style, but the optical formula, a lot of that stuff is very different. It is an autofocus lens, and obviously is very, very similar in terms of size and style to the X100 series, if that's something you're interested in and you have an interchangeable lens camera. One way to kind of get a similar feel to these cameras is to get a lens like that, toss one of those lens hoods on from Square Hood, and yeah, go with that. If you are interested in the XE4, I really love the little thumb grip here. And if you're doing any sort of work on a tripod or have any sort of larger lens other than these really compact small ones, this grip specifically is so, so nice. The regular camera has no grip whatsoever, and this one is really, really great. It's just the one straight from Fujifilm, as well as this little thumb grip from Fujifilm, but I will say that they are fantastic and definitely something I don't regret having. Now, to get a little bit more ridiculous, this is the Fujifilm X100V, and obviously we've added a few extra things to this one. The first of which being that I actually did pay more money, I know, to get the black versions of these Peak Design little clips here. It's a subtle thing, but personally, I like my stuff to be a little bit more minimal, and the red on here kind of throws it off for me a little bit. So I've purchased multiple of these, have them on all my Leica cameras, a lot of stuff like that. So the plain black ones, oddly enough, an accessory here. And then obviously you can tell in the lens that we have something a little bit more significant going on. This is the WCL X100II, I believe is like the full name. And clearly you're making a very, very large difference in the size of the camera right here by adding the lens. But for me, I really like this lens. It moves it from a 35mm equivalent to a 28mm equivalent, so makes things just a little bit wider. And the optical quality is actually really good on this, especially if you have one of these cameras. I would definitely not say to start with one of these. But if you have an X100V, you're like, oh, I wish it was just a little bit wider. I was just a little bit wider, or you were like, are desperately wanting like a Q2 or something. This is a way to get kind of like a more budget version of that in a way. It's definitely not going to be cheap, but is, you know, definitely going to be a lot cheaper than buying something like the Q2. The other nice thing is the newest version of that square hood also fits on here, so I can toss the Cinebloom filter on here as well. And at a wider focal length, like 28mm, you're definitely going to, you know, need a little bit more of a lens hood. So definitely recommend tossing one of those on here. But then what you've done is made a more of a monstrosity out of this camera and made it very, very front heavy. So something that I have been thinking about buying for a long time and finally pulled the trigger on, specifically because I was making this video. I have loved having this grip on the XE4 for a long time, and have obviously just tried to kind of stay away from that with the X100V, but just picked this up off of Amazon and really do like it. It's from WePhoto, don't know, I'll link it below. It looks really good. It does have a really nice vintage aesthetic to it. But the main thing being that if you have the larger lens, it just is so nice to have a little bit better of a grip. I think that also if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to carry it around your neck and you want to carry it just in a hand, maybe you have a hand strap, something like that, having the grip on it just makes it so much easier to carry around, and it makes this go from a very unbalanced setup to, you can see that it has a base plate on it, is completely balanced. Like even if I try to rock it forward, it's going to come back on itself. So definitely passes the balance test that way. And obviously still is a very small and compact setup, although it is obviously a little bit different from your typical X100V setup. Speaking of hand straps, I should have thought of that earlier, but now that I have mentioned it, these are also from Clever Supply Co. And the nice thing is they obviously just work within the same Peak Design system here. So if you wanted to carry it around, something like this, and then if you did accidentally drop it, you know, you're gonna be okay. So this also comes in a wider, hey, it's actually the same stuff. So it comes in a thinner version like this and then a wider version. The thinner version works a little bit better for something like this just because it's less material going around your wrist, but definitely something to check out if you don't already have one. And specifically, it's actually the thing that I keep on my camera when I'm doing any sort of flash work. So these have a flash on them, but it's really small. And if you're using anything other than like just the basic square hood, it's gonna get into the image. So what I have done as I slide that across the table is they don't make this anymore, but there's a few other companies, and the last one I saw was Mikey, I think is how you say it, not sure. But they make a version of this style of flash, and having a really small and compact setup like this, especially if you're gonna put any kind of flash on here, this grip is really nice. But it just gives you a very like, I don't know, like 60s news reporter kind of look to all of it, especially for parties, wedding receptions, specifically with the WCL. This is just really nice. It also can flip up so you can bounce flash off the ceiling if you want. If you're into that style of street photography, all that kind of stuff, this is a really good option. Again, this doesn't exist anymore. They don't make this specific flash anymore, but I will link a really similar one below. And then if you don't want to go for a smaller flash like that, but you don't want a full-on flash, these are actually the ones I use on my Leicas and my Sony cameras as well. This is the Godox TT350C. They make a Fujifilm version, a Canon version, a Sony version. They make just all sorts of different versions of these. And it's just a smaller version of a typical flash unit. So you are able to zoom, that you have a little bounce card here. You have the little thing right here that widens it out and diffuses it a little bit. It has all the same kind of modes that you'd see in a larger flash unit, but it's under $100 and pretty small. And again, with the grip, I feel like you could definitely use this without much of an issue. But that being said, it's definitely almost the size of the camera. So you probably don't want to add much more than this for a small camera like this, but you can if you want to. Specifically because both of them can bounce flash. This one can also rotate and hit the sides. It can rotate and hit behind you. You know, it's just a typical flash unit. So while you, again, don't have to do that, it's really helpful if that's something you're into. All right, well, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. There's a ton of stuff that you can jump into and possibly get. So whether you were just going with the base model, you're not doing anything, or you're kind of moving into buying a strap or buying a flash or a lens hood, something like that. I think all of them are cool options for sure. It just depends on what you want to do, how much weight you want to add. And generally, if you're going to go from the beginning of this video to the end of this video, it's kind of where I put the importance of all this stuff. So again, I would probably start with a strap, maybe add a lens hood, maybe add a shutter button, maybe add this extra WCL wide angle lens if that's something you're into. But if you're gonna keep it pretty minimal, that's kind of the point of this camera. And I know that a lot of people are gonna be watching this going like, why would you add a bunch more stuff to an already pocketable camera? You're making it not pocketable. I totally get that. Basically just tossing out all of these other ideas, and specifically to see kind of like what they all look like in practice, because you know, seeing something on a product page isn't always helpful. So if you have any questions about any of these, leave them in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and then I'll see you in this video about the X100V, or this one even about the X100F.